Welcome to the Policy Committee meeting of September the 12th. We'll start with the informational summary. Are there any questions on that? Nope. Okay, then we can move forward. This discussion will be on IDA, the school year calendar, and we'll turn this over to Ms. Essie McGuire.
Thank you. So we are today is the Policy Management Committee's second discussion of the school year 2020-21, so it's hard to say, 2020-2021 school year calendar. And what we have for you today is I'm going to just talk briefly about sort of the timeline and the work that we have done to date, and we will preview sort of the very first round of preliminary scenarios for the 2021 calendar. So the Policy Management Committee had its first meeting to discuss this calendar on July 12th. And the policy IDA does require that the Policy Management Committee take the first review of the calendar and also a review of any calendar scenarios before those are recommended to the board. So following the discussion that we had with Policy Management Committee in July, we did convene staff internally within MCPS, and we work with staff from a wide range of offices to really get all of the various functional perspectives on how an instructional calendar can be constructed for the upcoming school year with the state parameters we have, but also operational parameters. We work with our Office of Shared Accountability around the testing schedule, for example. We work with our curriculum colleagues, again, really, and certainly principals and teachers and support staff to kind of get everyone's different perspectives on an instructional calendar. So we do that work in August, and the results of that work are to really put together just a few different scenarios of what a functional instructional calendar could look like, and then that can serve as the jumping off point for the committee and then the board to begin to make adjustments to the calendar. So following today's Policy Management Committee review, the next step is that the calendar scenarios that the committee recommends today to forward to the Board of Education, to the full board, those we will prepare and then bring back to the board on October 8th. Typically, at that point then, the full board would also weigh in, perhaps make some adjustments, and identify a group of calendars that we would then send out for more robust public comment. Pardon me, and at that point we would really be able to spend October and parts of November on that public comment and feedback, begin to work more directly with stakeholder groups, but also really have that broad public outreach for input and feedback process. And then in November and December, the Board of Education can finalize the calendars for both the traditional and the innovative schools. And typically, the board does act on the calendar in December, as is outlined in your policy. Again, just a quick highlight there on the innovative schools. The scenarios that you'll see today do focus on the traditional school year calendar between September and June. We are, of course, preparing also the calendar for the innovative school year, which is the year-round extended year. That calendar, we're working with our implementation group there at Arcola Elementary School and Roscoe Nix Elementary School around their experience with the extended year this year, also their unique operational and educational features that they need to embed in the calendar. We're looking at options of how to structure that framework beginning in July and going through that July-August timeframe for them that will work with the end of the school year, accomplish their additional days, still leave some time for summer break. And so as we have those conversations with them, we'll be bringing those scenarios back with the scenarios for the traditional calendar when we come back to the full board in October. Remembering that the premise for the innovative school year calendar is that during the time that both schools are open, the calendars are the same in terms of days off, non-instructional days, and holidays. And so that's, in that respect, the traditional calendar does still form sort of the backbone and foundation for the innovative calendar as well. So we do begin, of course, our work with a quick review of the parameters for the school year in 2021. Labor Day next year is very late. It is Monday, September 7th, which would mean that if we were to start after Labor Day, the first day of school would be Tuesday, September 8th. Now, the General Assembly did pass a bill this past spring that does lift the restrictions on the beginning and end of the school year. So we do not have those restrictions of the need to start after Labor Day or to end before June 15th. In addition, recent developments are that the governor has not put forward this measure for the ballot for referendum in 2020. He has missed the deadline to do so. And so at this moment, it appears that it will not be on the ballot. Of course, something can always go on the ballot with signatures, but that initial deadline has passed. So it appears that at least for next year and for the foreseeable, well, at least for next year, we'll stop there, there would be, there is not any restrictions on when to start or end the school year for the 2021 calendar. This chart that is in your packet, but also on the screen, are the days that are mandated to be closed by state law. One feature that is present in the 2020-21 school year is an election. So we are required to be closed on Tuesday, November 3rd for Election Day. And then there is board policy that the school system is closed on Wednesday, January 20th for Inauguration Day. At the July discussion, the committee had raised the suggestion that we might want to look at a calendar that where the school system could be open on Inauguration Day. And so as we go through the scenarios, you'll see that we've prepared scenarios that both are closed on Inauguration Day as well as open on Inauguration Day. And we can come back to that. So otherwise, the days that are identified here relate to Thanksgiving and the day after. Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and winter break are all mandated to be closed in the state law. And then President's Day, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and then, of course, the Friday before Easter and the Monday after Easter, and then Memorial Day. So we have three scenarios to walk through, and I know these are always a little difficult to see on screen, but in addition, they are in your memo. And scenario A, which is the first one here, this represents sort of, well, this is a calendar that does begin after Labor Day. And so again, as you can see, Labor Day is late on the 7th, and so this calendar starts on Tuesday, September 8th. In all of the calendar scenarios that we're putting forward here, we've gone back to a couple of core issues. One is that they all reflect the typical spring break, the full spring break that MCPS has traditionally observed, with the exception of last year where we had a short one. And that then is a full week, 6 non-instructional days, and then the 2 weekends. So all of these scenarios do reflect a full spring break. In addition, these calendars do return to the previous practice regarding a full day of planning and grading time at the end of quarters. During the years that we were working within those constrained calendars, we weren't able to accomplish those full days, and we had worked through some different approaches to that related to half days and other time accommodations. But given that there is not that constraint in this calendar, we have returned to that practice of the full planning and grading days. And those full professional days are ones that we certainly have heard from staff are very important to them to have that time in the school year, and particularly at the end of quarters. So those are represented here again in all of the scenarios. And again, all the scenarios also do meet the Code of Maryland requirements for contingency days, to have those both at the end of the school year as well as have the possibility of adding back days during the school year as well. In scenario A, again, we begin after Labor Day. We've identified parent-teacher conferences in all of these scenarios around Veterans Day, which is November 11th. And so then the half days for conferences do show on the 11th and 12th. In this calendar, it does show the school system being closed on Inauguration Day, which is Wednesday the 20th. And this calendar sort of shows the odd configuration that we have coming up in 21, which is that Martin Luther King Day is on Monday the 18th, with Inauguration Day on the 20th. If the school system were closed, that would leave sort of the one isolated day on the 19th of January.
So I just want to jump in and comment on that. You know, first of all, I don't know who would come on the 19th. I think that we would experience high absenteeism because people would, no school Monday, no school Wednesday, and let alone heating our buildings for one day. From an instructional point of view, I think it's very awkward. I know that there are systems that have winter vacation, but, given weather problems that we can face in January, whatever, I'm going to offer a motion, but I think it makes for a very awkward week that week. And I would like to really see, as much as possible, to have full weeks where we can. And I want to add, from a historical context, the first inauguration of President Obama, we had not been closing as a system on Inauguration Day. And there was a huge desire in the community for us to be closed, and for students and parents to be able to celebrate, participate, view, whatever. And so when the board was making that decision that we would close for the first inauguration of President Obama, we said, well, then we should close for all, and to mark the importance and elevate the, for our students, the importance of the presidency. And I wholeheartely agree. My kids were in MCPS and in previous inaugurations when they had school. So the board made a motion that we would then close on subsequent inaugurations. And when we adopted the calendar policy, which is our process for adopting calendars and getting community feedback, etc., we included, that action of the board, so it's in IDA. But we have now been closed for 3 inaugurations, or, at least it's been in our policy. So 2 for President Obama and 1 for President Trump. I believe that we need to have in our language that we may make that decision, and I think it should be. We have this every 4 years. We may make that decision, but in the meantime, since we adopted closing on inauguration, the board has also expressed interest in trying to coordinate professional days with Lunar New Year, with Diwali, with Eid, and short of going to July 1, I think to be able to accomplish in our calendar, have a cohesive, reasonable plan, I think that we need to revise the policy so that it says we may be closed on inauguration, and I think we take it up every 4 years as we consider the calendar and the operational needs of the system, but it's no reflection on who, whether he or she who is inaugurated as president. It's about the operational and educational needs of our students, and I would certainly hope that we would encourage the superintendent to ask our schools to have the opportunity for students to view on TV the inauguration and maybe an instructional activity related to the presidency or the inauguration. But I think it doesn't make any sense to be closed on Martin Luther King Day on Monday, which is mandated by law, and then open Tuesday and then closed Wednesday.
I completely agree with Mrs. O'Neill's comments. I just wanted to mention that as a system this big operationally, it's not factually incorrect to say that students wouldn't show up on the day that's in between Martin Luther King Day and President's Day, or in the inauguration day. You can definitely expect for there to be a low amount of attendance in between those days based off of a 3-day weekend, and then a day after that. from an operational perspective, I find that to be a waste of our dollars when we have that day open.
Thank you, Mr. Tinby.
So let me just maybe continue to walk through the scenarios, and then I think, because there are different configurations, and then as you said, Mrs. O'Neill, we can talk about how to implement the various scenarios that the committee is interested in. One other thing I would like to note about scenario A, again, starting after Labor Day next year does result in a rather late end of school. And in this scenario, school ends on Monday, June 21st, and certainly if there are any snow days, that could get pushed any later. So again, just wanting to show sort of that full picture of how the school year falls out with these different parameters. So moving on to scenario B, we have two scenarios that start before Labor Day. Again, because Labor Day is so late, then we can actually start in September and still start before Labor Day. Scenario B starts on Tuesday, September 1st, and we have placed an early release day on that Friday before Labor Day, just to again sort of acknowledge the long weekend there and perhaps give folks the opportunity to still have some instruction and still begin to settle into the first week of school, but get out before the long weekend if that's appropriate. In this calendar, then also the last day of school becomes Wednesday, June 16th. And in this calendar, we have addressed the issue of Inauguration Day by actually closing on that Tuesday the 19th also, and having a little bit of an extended winter weekend break there around Inauguration Day. So this would just, again, address the attendance issues by being closed on that day also, instead of having it be open. But that's one scenario.
So you're starting on Tuesday, September 1, and not on a Monday. So we're not having, and then we would have a half day on that Friday. But I just want to point out, I believe that there would be football. That week
Yes.
we start with all of our interscholastic sports, so there would be football. So, many of our high school students and high school communities are not going to be going to Ocean City. They're going to, at least our athletes are,
That's correct. And actually, so interestingly, the athletic calendar follows state regulations, which in turn follow national regulations, so that all of the scholastic teams across the country are in sync for ultimately being able to have contests at different levels. And so there have been years where we start games before the beginning of school, particularly in years where we started after Labor Day. But again, that calendar certainly operates not independent of the school year, but it does dictate those days separately from the instructional calendar that the board sets up. Right. So whether we have a half day that day or no day that day, there still could be games according to the athletic calendar. Right. That is set.
I'm just thinking as a holistic approach to our educational system, and athletics are an important part. It kind of. And I think my personal preference is to start on Monday, August 31. I think it's, to get them begin the week and have a full instructional week.
Well, and so I think that would bring us to scenario 3, which, as Mrs. O'Neill has just said, begins on Monday, the 31st. And there are pros and cons, certainly, as you're saying, Mrs. O'Neill, that does give that full week, and there are benefits to that. There are also the potential benefits of additional professional days in pre-service by starting on the Tuesday, but we certainly can accommodate pre-service and other professional days in a variety of ways. But those are some of the considerations we had about when to start that time.
Scenario B, when would it end? When would school, the last day be?
Scenario B, we would end on, that's Wednesday, June 16th. So scenario B, really the only significant differences between scenarios B and C. One is starting on that September 1st, leaving, as you pointed out, that Monday, and ending on the 16th. And in this scenario, we did show Inauguration Day and the 19th both as closed days. In the next scenario, C, which is the last one that we put forward, we started school on that Monday, the 31st, giving that full week in that full week before Labor Day as the first week of school. In this scenario, we showed, as was requested, Inauguration Day open, and again, certainly we would obviously be open on the 19th then as well. And in this scenario, then we end a good bit earlier, which is that Friday, June 11th. Now, certainly these again are really just trying to represent the various combinations, how some of the implications and things fall out. Certainly it's the direction of the committee and then the board that we would take forward to adjust any of these scenarios. So for example, we could have this scenario with the days closed. I mean, again, this is where we really just want to put those building blocks before you to make those recommendations for how you would like to see these structured as we move them forward to the board.
Thank you.
Just to clarify a bit better, could you kindly explain the reason why school would start on the 1st versus the 31st between scenarios B and C?
Sure, and so, and there are pros and cons to both. There's not a lot of magic either way. That one thought would be whether it's better to start on the Tuesday to start in September rather than August, just from sort of people's sort of perceptions about summertime. Also, though, there would be an opportunity to have some extended professional development before the school year begins. But again, that's just an idea because we wouldn't program the calendar. We would program the professional development in accordance with our employee associations and the teacher work year, and also with sort of, again, those professional development needs. So that would be one possibility that we could have, though.
So technically for the perception of starting within August versus September.
That would be
Okay.
one consideration.
Okay.
I just want to say, this year, starting the day after Labor Day, I heard from many friends and my own daughter that, the last week of August or last week before Labor Day was a challenge because camps had closed, because college students return to colleges, and most camps had closed up. Some of the childcare, goes on a very brief hiatus before school starts, and many people were challenged to find coverage for their children that week. And I can appreciate the people, the businesses in Ocean City, but I also will say that being out in the malls and people were scurrying around getting their kids ready for school, and whenever that week is, they're going to be going to the shoe store, to the barber shop to get the haircuts, and focused on the start of school, whatever the first day is. And the other piece is I personally believe that ending earlier in June is a better scenario. That I find that our kids, our schools really hit the ground running at the start of the school year, and everything's in wrap-up mode when you get to June, and it's not as productive. I don't know whether people are tired from the school year, focused on whatever that summer vacation or summer plans are, but I think that I think people should see all three options. I think we should take all three to the board so that our colleagues see the implications. I mean, I think ending June 21st is not desirable at all. But I think, we have heard from people, the governor had this survey that indicated many people like the idea of us starting after Labor Day, but with Labor Day as late as it is, I think there are serious implications. So I think all three scenarios should go forward to the board, and for the community to view what the scenarios are. But I do believe we need to offer some language to modify the inauguration piece.
Since I think you've made a motion to take all of these to the full board,
Yes.
is there a second?
Second.
Okay. And we're all in agreement that these should go forward. I will.
Need to hear from Stephanie about that.
Oh, Stephanie, I'm sorry. And I did not introduce, or have you introduce yourselves. I'm so sorry. We'll do that before you leave the table, anybody who's leaving. Yeah. Stephanie?
So I just would, I'm sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say that, yes, so I think to move forward the scenario where the school system is open on Inauguration Day, we would need to also carry forward the suggestion for some language that would address the policy.
So a possible way to address that would be for this committee to consider language that you would recommend to the board, should the board choose to move forward with one of the options that includes opening on Inauguration Day. Give me a hand. So this language is just proposed as a starting point for the conversation. The two options are to modify the language that is in policy IDA. You have a copy of the policy in your materials, and the relevant language is on page 3. So we're under section C, position number 7, Inauguration Day. You find that on page 3. And there's two options here, both of which can be modified as you wish. But the first option is to put in permissive language, so that says when the day of a presidential inauguration falls on a school day, that day may be designated as a holiday upon consideration of other factors impacting the school calendar. And these are some suggestions. You suggested, referencing the operations of the school operation. We could put some language to that effect. But the concept here is to provide some parameters that focus on the operation of the school, other factors impacting the calendar, because we will recall, and as you referenced, Mrs. O'Neill, at the time that the language was put in the policy initially, we didn't want there to be any appearance of partisanship or anything like that, so it was determined that we would use the language shall be designated a system holiday, so that regardless, and there would be a consistent application. So if we're making the language more permissive, we need to be sure that the reason that we would choose not to open, not to close, to open on Inauguration Day is tied to operational needs specific to the calendar. And these are just some suggestions. An alternative, which is not what I'm hearing from you today, but at this time, but an alternative would be to just simply remove that language altogether. So this language is offered as a starting point, and what we could do is when Ms. McGuire presents the options to the board on October 8th, we could be prepared to present this language so that the board could take tentative action on the policy at the same time and send it out for the policy would be out for public comment at the same time that the chosen calendar scenarios are out for public comment. I think you talked about that part of the process. So we'd have two sets of things out for public comment at the same time. An alternative is to wait until the board makes a decision on which calendar it's putting forward, and that puts us in a really tight box to get the policy approved after.
I think from a logistics point of view, we should put the policy out at the same time as we put the calendars, various scenarios out, so that we begin the process. I personally think that the option 1, where you have the May, gives future boards the opportunity and to either be open or closed. And anyway, I'm going to move that we send to the full board the first language.
Second.
Okay. Are we all agreed on that?
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you. Then it's unanimous that we will send this forward with May, and we'll send it with the options of the calendar. Thank
And
you.
So we'll be
just as a-
prepared for this policy to go forward for tentative action,
On the-
contingent upon the board choosing to move one of the scenarios that includes opening on Inauguration
Mhm.
Day.
And just to clarify, for us to put forward the 3 options to the board, this policy has to be, the language in this policy has to be changed.
The language in the policy would need to be changed in order to implement the scenario where inauguration day is open.
Okay.
From a timing perspective, it's helpful to
Have
move
it
the
done at the
language
same
forward
time.
together so that they can travel together and be approved in concert.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And so then I'm hearing from the committee, just to be clear, that these scenarios will go forward to the board. And are there any other changes to them other than sort of what's here?
No, can you just explain about how, you didn't touch on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, where they fall
Yep.
in the calendar, in that calendar year, and also consideration of professional days with Diwali, Eid, and Lunar New Year, where do they fall in the calendar?
Yep, absolutely. So in each calendar, Yom Kippur does show as a non-instructional day, and that does fall on Monday, September 28th. Our information at the moment, looking ahead to the calendars, and some of the dates do change, particularly ones that are tied to lunar calendars can change, but at this time it does appear that Rosh Hashanah would fall on a weekend, and that's why it's not represented here. When the board put out the calendar survey, those holidays were ones that showed the greatest impact from an attendance standpoint, at least in terms of our feedback in the survey, and those are the ones that we have carried forward for representation here. At the same time, though, there certainly are other days that the board may want to consider moving forward, whether to consider additional accommodations for. Lunar New Year would come in February on Friday the 12th. And again, these are preliminary dates. At this time, we would certainly work with our colleagues in the Interfaith Advisory Council to be sure that we were, in concert with the dates as anticipated. Diwali appears to be falling on a weekend also, and there is Eid al-Fitr in May that would fall on Thursday, the 13th of May. So those would be additional days that would impact the school year.
I appreciate it. So I just wanted to make sure when these scenarios are put forward to the board, is the board as a full board able to make any changes that they'd like? Okay.
So
All
the
right.
board at that point, this really is the very, very first step. Again, we'll make any changes that are necessary after today. The scenarios that the board will review would be these, and then again can put forward any changes or alterations and additional scenarios that the board would like on the 8th. That then becomes the full set that we would put out for public comment.
Okay. Thank
I
you.
just want to point out there were a couple of things that people may not understand
No,
about.
it's okay, go ahead. Yeah.
That, like, we're closed on election day and people, it's required by state law, but it actually is a good practice. Many, many, many of our schools are voting sites, and it would present parking challenges, security challenges, having large numbers of adults coming into our school buildings. And, people also sometimes ask, how come we have to be closed Good Friday and the Monday after Easter? And those are dictated by state law. So, people that have questions about that need to take that up with delegates and senators. It's not our call. It's required.
All right, so I think we're unanimous on sending this forward to the board with the language, May, and with the 3 scenarios, and thank you. Now, since I forgot to do this, could we have an introduction? Would you start, Mrs. O'Neill?
Pat O'Neill, board member of the committee.
Nate Tinbite, student member of the board.
Lori Christina Webb, Chief of Staff for the Board.
Robin Seabrook, Director of Governance, Policy, and Community Relations for the Board.
Victoria Van Dyke, Board Staff.
Maureen McNamara, Office of the General Counsel.
Stephanie Williams, Associate General Counsel.
Josh Sivan, General Counsel.
Essie McGuire, Executive Director, Operations.
Tracy Foster, Executive Director, Office of the Chief Academic Officer.
Thank you. And I'm Judy Daca, a member of the board. All right, thank you so much, Stephanie and Essie, and I know we're going to turn the next part over to Stephanie.
Sure, thank you. So the next item on the agenda is further discussion of Board Policy JEE, student transfers. Are we good? Okay. I'm on? Yes, okay. Further discussion of Board Policy JEE, student transfers, and this is in response to a new business item regarding the policy that Mrs. Jeanette Dixon, board member, put forward in June of 2018 and was unanimously adopted by the board in July of 2018. Since this has been going on for quite a while and we've had some changes and new folks to the issue, I want to just take a moment and sort of refresh our collective recollection and update folks who are new to the conversation. So as I referenced, Mrs. Dixon put forth a new business item in 2018, and we've been working on it quite a bit since then, trying to get this very important issue just right. And we've had a lot of attention paid to it. We started with the Board Policy Management Committee having a discussion in November of 2019, and then it went for the board, 2018, sorry, and then it went to the board for full discussion for the first time in January of 19. And at that time, the board asked that the Policy Management Committee take it up for further discussion on certain specific topics. You have also in your materials, you have the binders in front of you, and it's in board docs for those who are trying to access online. I'd like to particularly note for you that during those discussions in November and January, we presented a great deal of data, and those are in for your reference again, provided for your reference again in your binders. We have information about the impact of transfers into and out of each school within the system, and then we provide that information again, but yet with information about the to and the from specific to the school and the number of students that are in that school. And we have data that includes the requests by reason code for the 2018-19 school year, which was the first year that we had captured it as such. You also have information, benchmarking information from our neighboring jurisdictions, and some very relevant state board opinions. So all of this information has been discussed and reviewed by the committee, by the board members, and that brings us to our most recent conversations, which were in June of this year, at which time we discussed the concept of transfers based on academic reasons, and the board, this policy management committee rather, gave staff direction to make modification to the policy to reference a process for handling transfers for academic reasons, because right now that's not those requests based on academic concerns, course preferences, and so forth, is not permitted in the policy. It's not provided for, I should say, in the policy, so that doesn't give us the option of granting the request based on an academic purpose under the current terms of the policy. And so the board directed us to provide some process around that. So that is something that you'll be hearing more from us about. And also in the June meeting, we talked about the current language in the policy, which speaks to an automatic articulation for a student who is in middle school that has been given a COSA to attend a middle school. They may automatically articulate to the feeder high school for that middle school without having to demonstrate further hardship. So that's where we have been. And that brings us to our conversation today, where we have been, we are focusing on two broad categories and some subcategories within. We have transfers granted upon a basis of a unique hardship, and we're going to talk about two different categories of unique hardship. We're going to talk about hardships surrounding childcare. We'll take some time and kind of walk through that and see what the committee's thinking and direction is for us. Then we will talk about hardships related to medical or social emotional needs of a student. We'll talk about that separately. And then we will talk about transfers based on the fact that a student is the child of a staff of MCPS. So that's kind of where we're going, where we've been, and where we're going. So I know I've gotten us all out of sorts with the order of of the PowerPoint here, but let's bring us up to talking about unique hardships. So in policy JEE, our language is rather limited with respect to a hardship. It simply says a student may apply for a change of school assignment, a COSA, when a documented unique hardship is shown. We provide a little more specificity in the regulation when we say that a COSA may be requested when a family's individual and personal situation creates a unique hardship that could be mitigated by a change of school environment. However, problems that are common to large numbers of families, such as child care issues or program and course preferences, do not constitute a unique hardship, absent compelling factors. So that's where we stand at the moment with respect to hardships of any category. So as we prepare to take a closer look at hardship decisions, as we prepare to, I did want to say a little bit more about the process of looking at hardships right now before we talk about our framing questions. Because this is the extent of the language that we have in our policy and regulations, determining what constitutes a unique hardship typically requires a bit of case-by-case analysis. And for this analysis, our central office staff really spends a lot of time working closely with school-based staff for the school where the student attends, to get a full and clear understanding of the circumstances that may be impacting the student and their ability to thrive at their home-based school. And sometimes in discussions, our central office staff and school-based staff, they may come to a conclusion that perhaps it would be helpful for the student to leave the current situation, but another school may just as well address the hardship that's been presented, and alternatives are offered. So this is sort of a personalized approach that is taken in one-by-one analysis of each case. That's how we approach the review of the hardship request. So before we move forward with taking a closer look at hardship and possibly discussing alternative language, we'd like for you to just think about, have in your back of your mind a couple of framing questions. We're going to look at some language used by neighboring jurisdictions as examples. These jurisdictions have more specificity in their policy than we do. So would more specificity in our board policy JEE regarding permitted reasons for COSAs lead to greater equity, and or would it lead to more efficiency in the decision-making process? Would there be any unintended consequences that might arise from modifying our COSA criteria if we include the greater specificity? So those are some things that I just offer for you to think about as we move through the discussion. So we'll start our review of hardship decisions with child care concerns. So an example of a COSA that MCPS may grant based on child care needs would be one where parents provide documentation of work hours that extend beyond the typical school-based before and after care program hours, and that they have grandparents, friends, whomever, in a different school-based attendance area who can care for the child before and or after school. So you might think of maybe particular hardship if it's a single parent who works, let's say, a noon to midnight shift, 3 school nights out of the week rather. So that might be that's an example of a child care situation that's considered presented as a hardship. So we've identified two local jurisdictions that we have language that we think is worthy of your consideration, just for thinking through what, if anything, you want to do to the MCPS policy. Starting with Baltimore County Public Schools, the parent of an elementary school, so they specify that there's limit to an elementary school student, may demonstrate hardship in obtaining appropriate before and after care within the boundaries of the school where the child is domiciled. They may submit an application, but they shall provide documentation concerning the child care provider and their name and address and so forth, and where this care could be provided. They have additional specific provisions for students who are severely or profoundly disabled, and they do set forth that if the requested school is overcrowded, that could be a basis for denial. Now I refer you to the language of Fairfax County, which is very similar in that they specifically allow a consideration for a hardship based on child care. However, they require, in addition to essentially what I just suggested for Baltimore County, that a minimum of 2 documented attempts to secure child care within the base school boundaries will be required. So they require documentation of 2 attempts which were unsuccessful for the family. And again, they state that if the child preferred school is at capacity, that's basis for denial. So I want to pause here and let you have some time for a discussion and to think about whether you would like to make any suggested changes or language that is specific to child care that might go into this policy, or if it's acceptable to you the way it is.
Well, right now, we pretty much exclude childcare because it says, I'm not looking at well, I guess I could look at it, but common hardships such as childcare.
It's not considered.
Not considered, but I know that actually they probably do in the transfer and appeals unit consider childcare.
I mean, I think it may be helpful just on that point to have a little bit of background if Mr. Neff wants to come forward. But I think that while the general case of child care doesn't necessarily merit a COSA being granted, unusual situations regarding child care and distinctive circumstances could.
Right.
Josh is correct. When we say what we mean is child care in and of itself is not a hardship because it's common to most of us who have children. Child care is an issue, but child care related to that example that Stephanie showed where the parent has work hours that cannot be accommodated by typical child care hours are certainly considered. The other one that's most commonly considered is if there's a documented financial hardship. So if there is a documented financial need of the family and there is a friend, neighbor, relative who is willing to watch the children at a reduced rate compared to a regular daycare facility, that's another one that would tend to be granted.
The Baltimore County one specifies elementary, but I know that appeals that we have speak about middle school kids, and I know, I guess there's a certain age that a child can be alone, but the reality is many parents don't want we've had parents who don't want their middle school child unattended in the afternoon. I know we probably at all levels have children who are unsupervised, but I'm just pointing that out. I think that's pretty limiting with just the elementary, because I think the reality, we've seen appeals about child care in middle school students.
Right. Child care concerns for a rising 6th grader certainly are a thing. We do look at them differently than we would an incoming kindergartner. And one of the things we look at when it's a rising sixth grader request is what are the parents' hours? What is a reasonable amount of time that a 11 or 12-year-old might be able to be home till that parent comes home? But certainly we look at the 11 or 12-year-old sixth grader differently than we do the 5 or 6-year-old kindergartner in that respect.
I don't know, I feel that the work that's done in the other levels, the first hearing level, is very complete. I know that our staff really does try to find out what has happened with the childcare, with the school. I feel comfortable that if there's something really egregious, that they would not send it forward to us. So I think we ought to leave it as it is.
I do agree with that, definitely. My only fear is that if we were to broaden up language or compare ourselves with languages that are more broader, like other systems, that individuals might use childcare as a reason excessively to transfer. And I think that that's one fear when we're a system this large. So just to be said, I am satisfied with the language right now.
Well, I think that our current language is pretty limiting, and as a parent, I might view it as, why should I even apply for a COSA if they say, the way the language is written, I might believe that it's a discouraging factor, and yet I know that, we have lots of appeals, or a fair number that come to the board that are based on childcare, and I think it is a valid concern. But I know from the appeals that we see that every one of our elementary schools has opportunities for childcare, but the financial circumstances of a family, the work hours, should be a factor that we consider. I think that the language in the policy should be more open to consideration, because I think that's the reality that we're actually operating in now.
Well, generally, staff sends us the options that they've presented. It's not like they haven't tried to find the appropriate thing for the families. The financial thing is something that I don't think we can make a decision about. Somebody else will have to make that decision before it gets to us, and usually they do.
But also, what we're adopting in policy gives staff the guidance to look at that.
Right. Oh, definitely.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Right. I happen to think we should develop some language, different language.
So conveniently on the screen right now is the language and the regulation, not the policy, about problems that are common to a large number of families, such as childcare issues, do not constitute a unique hardship absent other compelling factors. Is there a way to use that language to explain what some of the compelling factor? So to keep with the point that Mr. Neff was saying, that childcare by itself, but also to recognize the fact that to explain to parents, so it's not a mystery, that if there are extenuating factors like a really incompatible work hour situation, as Mr. Neff mentioned, or a real significant financial hardship, that would be an additional piece. So that would be explicating that, so that parents are clear that just a child care issue is common, but the exceptions may be where we would weigh in.
One suggestion would be adding common to common child care issues or program course preferences. Another one could be giving a couple of examples, absent other compelling factors such as work hour issues and or financial issues.
I am open to modifying language to accommodate that. Have you all, I'm sure you all probably don't have the data before you, but could you give an estimation as to how many appeals consist of probably the subject of childcare and how many are accepted?
think it's in,
It's in the binder.
what page?
I think it's attachment C, probably, or attachment. So I just hope that that can be on the record to see how common of a cause.
And under Exhibit 3 in your packet, we have by reason code. And this is just for one school year.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a total of 145 requests with 107 of them coming from elementary, 33 from middle, and 5 from high. And I haven't looked at this recently to remember whether we put in here that they were granted. But you can see how many were requested, 107. And I just don't recall whether this data has the number granted by that committee.
I don't-
say documented childcare, because if it says documented, that means it was found to be approved.
I think Josh's suggestion and sort of blending it with the language that you've just given, Mr. Neff, I think would be a good idea. I mean, I don't know how many other parents out there besides the 107 that applied might be thinking that, well, why am I, I can't even apply. I think that the regulation certainly is more, I view as more open than what the policy says.
Oh, well, I agree with you on that we want to keep that a little bit open for parents who have unusual requests, and that we look at that. But I know that we got one where the child care was supposed to be done by a grandparent who was not physically able to do it. So that's why it was forwarded to us, and I know that all the investigation had been done before that.
So we'll take that consensus from the committee's comments back and figure out a way to propose taking that language from the reg, moving it up, and putting some additional suggestions.
We will move the discussion to unique hardship decisions that are based on social and emotional issues and medical concerns. So here are a couple of examples of circumstances for which we've approved COSAs based on these types of requests. So, for example, under social emotional category, if the parents have provided documentation of ongoing therapy or mental health issues, and the school verifies that the student did in fact have a bad experience there with other students, and strongly advises new placement. Again, this is work that our staff does here in communicating with the school about the circumstances specific to each student. And under the category of medical, we do not break this language down this way in the policy, but this is how the board has asked us to break the topic of unique hardship down, but this is how it plays out in the process. If a student has significant health issue requiring some type of unique care that maybe is frequent medical appointments, that the location they're far from home or the parent's work location, then again, with conversation with the school and the parents and the families and so forth, we work through to see what's the best option for the students. So we have 3 districts that we want to share. They're kind of on a continuum in terms of degree of documentation and so forth that's necessary. So first we want to share with you Howard County Public Schools, which permits the superintendent or designee to administratively place a student in a school when there is concern for the physical, mental, or emotional well-being or educational welfare of the student, other students, or the school system personnel. And Howard County indicates that they may provide transportation. So it references that transfers can be made based on physical, mental, and emotional well-being, but doesn't require a significant level of documentation to support it. It doesn't require specific documentation to report it, as opposed to moving to Baltimore County, which again, if the student demonstrates exceptional hardship for reasons of medical, emotional, or social adjustment, they are requiring an independent, detailed documentation substantiating the circumstances. For example, from physicians, psychologists, social workers, or counselors. And this documentation must be submitted to the application form. Just noting number 4, that they again reserve the right to deny the request based on the school being at capacity. And the third benchmark district, Fairfax County, permits the transfers for students who demonstrate exceptional hardship for reasons of medical, emotional, social adjustments. The parents must present detailed documentation defining how a school transfer supports the student's treatment plan, and that's required from a current independent, specifically non-FCPS, non-Fairfax County Public Schools licensed health care provider. These include physicians, psychologists, social workers, or counselors. They have the application process here, and they indicate that this must be completed annually. So in Fairfax, in Montgomery County, once you demonstrate the hardship, it usually you're granted the COSA, and it lasts till the student moves to the next level. Several jurisdictions, Fairfax County being one of them, require that process to be completed annually. While we're talking about Fairfax County, and they are very specific about current independent non-FCPS licensed healthcare providers, currently, Mr. Neff may speak to this more, but currently we receive requests for COSAs from families who may not have access to that level of care, but they are well known in the school. They may be seen by counselors or psychologists at the school level. So we take in, currently MCPS takes into consideration feedback that we receive from school-based professionals in addition to what a family may present with respect to independent
I think,
provider.
I think it's an equity issue, having with the Fairfax language, because certainly there are families that cannot afford private therapists, or, and I think that MCPS psychologists, counselors should, PPWs, should be aware. And, I know that, overcrowding is a huge concern in MCPS, but I know when it's in the best interest of the child, that one child may be granted a COSA to a school. We're not absolutely locking the door when COSAs are considered because of hardships. So, am I right that?
Yes, I agree with you. I think if we get too prescriptive in our language, we might disadvantage some of those families that I think Ms. Dixon was thinking about when she raised this issue in the first place. We have an opportunity through our current practice, as Stephanie said, to reach out to school counselors, school psychologists, and school-based staff and verify, absent a formal mental health professional or an external mental health professional. And you are correct. We don't have any schools that are flat out closed. And so if there is a student with a significant mental health or emotional issue, and a individual school is the only school that will ameliorate that issue, that student would get the COSA into that school.
My children were never on COSAs to schools, but my older daughter, who has asthma, twice during her MCPS career, I was called, and I had to go to this. I went to the school, obviously. I wanted to go because she was having a severe asthma attack, and I do realize, she didn't have a 504 plan. It was, but I think there are circumstances that we absolutely should be social and emotional and medical reasons. I mean, children who are diabetic and suffer from epilepsy or, I don't know, brittle bone or whatever. It should, we should be accommodating, but we also need to be careful and be equitable. So.
When we're looking at medical issues, a lot of times we're looking at where are the providers? Are there regular appointments at providers where geographically a school might make more sense? I think in some cases with other medical conditions, many times the first call wouldn't be to a parent, it would be to emergency services. And we also, we have nurses and health techs in all of our schools. So we look at all of those factors when we're evaluating the medical requests.
I'd like to see us continue to be able to do that and not be restricted by the language that Fairfax has, because I know that usually staff does extensive reviews and understands what the family circumstances are, and the schools also give information, and we really appreciate having that information from them through the pupil personnel worker.
I think the main thing, I'm not wowed by Howard, Baltimore County, or Fairfax by the language. I think the spirit of what we're doing, needs to be continued, but and it should be called out in our policy. But I have to say, I'm just not feeling the language in these. Specific,
So is that just, I gave you where we've been and where we are, but I didn't talk about where we're going. So it's our intention to come back in October and bring you draft language for whatever direction you give us today. So I feel like you're giving us direction to clarify to the community that these are some categories of reasons for which a student may apply, but there needs to be emphasized that there needs to be a compelling reason to back up these categories of requests. So we could, if my understanding is correct of where you are directing us, we could come up with some language that sort of lists broadly, more specifically than is currently the current language does, but still broadly, the categories of reasons for which a transfer might be permitted, but clarify that there's some compelling reasons, and we could give some examples like the financial hardship or extenuating work hours and things like that.
Right. And the social and emotional and medical.
Right.
I think you've captured what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm not loving the language that we've seen from the other counties.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And looking at Fairfax's language, I think we need to move away from the prescriptive language that does set equitable barriers for students in our county. Especially in a time where we have a large amount of students in poverty and on free and reduced meals.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so the next category of type of request for which a change of school assignment might be requested is circumstances in which the student's parent works for MCPS. You have, in your materials, you have a document that this one that shows various categories of questions and circumstances that are considered when a school district permits children of staff to have a COSA without demonstration of a hardship. And there are a variety of factors that are considered by each district. However, the overarching point is that we seem to be the only district in Montgomery County that does not provide such opportunity for the students of staff to do. So that's a point of comparison. However, we feel have strong reasons for having taken that position currently, and just want to bring them to your attention again as you consider this. We need to think about whether granting a transfer to a student based on the parent's employment status with MCPS would it serve an educational purpose? Would there be unintended consequences of allowing students to come to their parents' work site during the day? Would we vary our decision based on where the parent works? Is this a benefit that would only be offered to parents who are school-based? What opportunities might be available to families, to employees who work at one of the central office locations? Would we make it available to go to a nearby school? There are just so many questions that this generates. Further questions would be, once they have been granted a COSA to the school in which the parent works, then are they granted the COSA? Does that continue to go to the schools in the feeder pattern? Presumably, there's the continuation of the cohort that they've been with thus far, and possibly still, if not the same school, in close proximity because it's in the cluster to the parent. So there are a lot of questions that need to be thought about. We also want to think about, in fairness to other families in our community. So we have children who are students who are the children of our staff, and the staff would like to have them work close by their work. They work long hours, no one doubts that, but so do other people. They may work at the hospital or a restaurant or just about anywhere. So we want to think about that in terms of comparison of fairness to the rest of our community. What impact does it have on the overall on the cluster once that agreement is made at the school level in terms of predicting the articulation pattern? On the other hand, would it impact a teacher or other staff person's decision making in determining what school they seek to be employed? On the other hand, could we use it as an incentive to attract staff to some of the schools with the greatest need? So that's a lot of issues, and we've laid them out in a couple of slides for you to think about. We've talked about, we've met with a focus group of principals to get some feedback, and you could probably draw the line straight down the middle. We had principals who were very much in favor of it because they thought that they found it a benefit that supports their staff and added to staff morale because they were less concerned about having to rush in and out, to get to their children, and they had a confidence level knowing their children were nearby. And then we had principals who had experienced circumstances in which having the child of a staff member in the building could create conflict between the parent and the staff members who are also professional colleagues, and the question of where is the student during the parent's actual duty time. So school ends prior to the end of the staff's duty day. So those are a few of the questions that we suggest you consider as you move forward in your discussion of consideration of parental employment status within MCPS as a basis of a transfer without demonstration of a hardship.
So I just wanted to mention that I always think about, appeals whenever we would receive in a theoretical situation where a staff member there have been instances, for example, where a staff member might experience transportation hardships. For some reason, I feel as if we need to incentivize our role of staff in MCPS. I know that many questions come around that, but I do feel like if you are a staff member in MCPS, then you should reap the benefits of being a staff member in MCPS. That's how I personally feel.
Well, I don't really feel that way about it. I think that it is a disruption in a school to have children come. This is really with just teachers. And they are responsible for a duty day, and if they have to be there with their own students, they're not really supposed to be with their own children. So I think that's a concern, and I think the discipline issue or the grading issue could be a problem as well. But if we decide that we want to allow that, then I think people who work near the school, even though they're not our staff, should be able to have the same privilege. And if they are not teachers in the school system, they work here in the central office or they work in transportation or whatever, that we need to extend that to them. But it depends on, where the board wants to go with it. I just have an objection to them for teachers having kids in their classrooms.
Yeah, I don't agree with. I don't agree with teachers having kids in classrooms, just as you mentioned. Like, I completely agree with what you're mentioning.
Then what are we going to do?
Well,
we can't have it,
I also see the issue of the greater community. Okay, you work at NIH, but you live in Germantown, and you want your child closer to where you work. And I also see the issue of a high school teacher who has elementary children wanting their children closer to them. They're not in the same building. But I understand. I desire, and several years ago when that tornado hit Moore, Oklahoma, and the elementary school was severely damaged, there were a lot of teachers in that building. I remember from the news reports that parents were torn between their classroom children and their own children who were in the building, and were they safe? But they felt their professional responsibility to their classroom children. But
It's a touchy
life is
subject.
complex, and I think that we do grant transfers to staff members. We have a fair number that
Yeah,
every year.
staff members are parents in the community like other parents, so if they do have a unique hardship, they're not disadvantaged in our process because they work for us, but they need to document and identify the same unique hardship. But if they have one, they are absolutely granted, yes.
I think it should be an incentive, especially like for our Title I and focus schools, to help to attract not novice teachers, but more experienced teachers who may have families, but I do think that it should be, I guess I'm rambling. I don't know about the articulation on, I think it should be while you're in that building, and that it should be, you must adhere to the terms of the contract. So not having your child sit in the classroom while you're doing parent conferences.
Yeah,
I think that it should be limited.
So I will mention, when we do approve COSAs for parents, we do insist that they have a child care plan. And so we ask them what that is. So a student being unmonitored or monitored by the teacher parent or or pushed off on the office staff or something like that is not reasonable or appropriate. So when a parent does document a unique hardship, we ask the next question, which is, okay, what is your child care plan for the hours where your child's not assigned to school, but you still have duty hours? And we expect them to have one.
Okay. That makes a difference in terms of having the child there when you're supposed to be working with your other kids. The disagreements about grading, if it's an elementary child and the teacher's in middle school, that's not going to come up. But I do think that if we decide on this, that all facets of the community and of the school system need to have a chance to have their child close to them or in their school. I just am concerned about how it works out, but you've given me some comfort in that you're looking at child care for the teachers who are asking for this, and that you're asking for documentation or at least some idea of what they're going to do.
Can I ask just a point of clarification, Dr. Daka? You're saying it should be available to all MCPS staff, is what you're saying? Yeah. Okay.
To tell you the truth, there are people in this building who have children that don't live in this area but have their children in these schools. So I know that people want to do that, and it may be important to do that.
I think we should accommodate our staff, and but I do think that we need to emphasize the adherence to the contract and appropriate child care plans that age appropriately, but then also limiting it so that it's not an automatic articulation to the next level within that cluster.
And am I hearing that this would be for all schools, or is this, because I also heard a focus on schools that are either focus schools or Title I schools or innovative schools, and I think that one of the things to just think about in terms of how expansive or broad or narrow is how this could help or hurt some of our efforts to also encourage staff to be retained in schools that are Title I schools and focus schools and the like.
I think my preference would be for focused Title I and innovative schools.
Means that a school that isn't one of those, you wouldn't allow the parent to. I don't know how you can do that.
Well, unless there's documented unique hardship, yeah.
Okay. And the articulation, I think, should just go all the way through. If you give the COSA, they should go all the way through the cluster.
I don't know. I think I agree with the focus on Title I, innovative, and focus schools. The thing is that if it were for all other schools, just as we mentioned earlier, if there is documentation of unique hardship, then that would accommodate for that.
So then, as an option, as we come forth in October with language, we'll look to language that focus on I'm just summarizing, on so separate and apart from the hardship criteria, if you're a MCPS staff member and you are teaching at a Title I focus or innovative school and you want to have a COSA for your child to attend that school, that would be considered in the process, and we can flesh out more how that would work. And I also wanted to summarize that it would be not just school-based staff, but presumably staff at other facilities that are near to those schools, and we'll have to figure out how that impacts crowding around, for instance. I'm just thinking about schools near the depots or the like and what the implications on those schools would be.
So that means that if you work at a central office facility or a depot or something like that, that is near a Title I focus or innovative school?
Right.
Okay. Okay. I think we have some direction here. So the last section of this topic on policy JEE is just sort of an update on state board action. I know that you are aware that the State Board of Education has been looking at the issue of student transfers, and even though they have received data that shows that over 80% of the requests across the state for student transfers are generally granted, they are taking a look at requiring LEAs to take a different approach to considering COSAs. This is an update as to what is going on, the conversation. These regulations have not been even released for public comment yet, so we don't have any idea at this point in time as to what the timeline might be behind this, but we just want to make sure that everybody knows kind of what might be coming down the road. So at the state board meeting on July 23rd, the board granted permission to publish regulations that would set forth a best interest of the student analysis. So as always, for the appeal of a denial of a transfer, the local board's decision shall be considered prima facie correct, and the state board would not substitute its judgment for of the local board. That's the sort of the premise upon which the state considers appeals at this time. But the new language starts with unless the decision fails to address with particularity the best interest of the student, including, when appropriate, how denying the transfer reasonably meets the educational needs of the student, meets the physical or emotional need of the student, meets the safety needs of the student, or if there are barriers that negatively impact the transfer request, such as school capacity, course availability, transportation, or other barriers. Even if the transfer is in the best interest of the student, then the LEA's decision must explain with particularity why the barriers could not be overcome. So this is a bit of would lead to a bit of a different way of looking at the transfer request as we receive them today. So we wanted to bring that to your attention. Again, we don't have any information on timing and of the state action, and we are on pace to continue moving forward unless you direct us differently for bringing forward a revised policy to you in October, and then to move it for tentative action at your discretion.
I don't know. I just think we ought to go forward with our policy and wait to see what the state is going to decide. I'm concerned about meets the educational needs of the student, because then it could be, I want to take Russian, and I can't at my school. I think that's going to be a concern. That's if the state board says we have to do that.
I think we need to keep moving forward. We've been working on this for quite some time. We don't know where the state board will go, and also it's my understanding, once they publish a regulation, it could go to Annapolis to LRE. Is that correct?
Go ahead, Josh.
No, you don't believe.
Yeah, now you put me on the spot here, huh? AELR, I think it is, the committee that reviews the regulation before it's released for public comment. Yes, part of the legislative body.
I mean, I know our colleagues on the board are anxious for us to bring forward a draft, for tentative action with some changes. I'm not sure whether these changes will go far enough for them. I think it's a start. It's a pretty meaty, nutty, naughty policy that's had a lengthy legal history here in Montgomery County, and so I think we need to take a stab at it and get it going.
Okay. So that, okay.
We don't wait for the state.
Well said. Okay. So that concludes our discussion on policy JEE. So Dr. Daka, our next item for discussion is the annual update on policy JHC, child abuse and neglect. You have a number of materials in your packet, and I just picked up the wrong set of materials here. Okay, so you have policy JHC, child abuse and neglect. You have regulation JHC, RA, reporting and investigating child abuse and neglect, and you have our best practices for employee email and other digital communications, the employee code of conduct. All of these materials support our efforts around child abuse and neglect. And then you have the annual update on the implementation of memo from the superintendent to the board, which is the annual update on the implementation of Board of Education policy JHC, child abuse and neglect, for fiscal year 2019. And Mr. Greg Edmondson is here to walk us through this memo and the update more generally.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Greg Edmondson, Director of Student Welfare and Compliance, and I wanted to share with you the work that we've done as a district from last school year to this school year. Annually, we provide, Dr. Smith, our superintendent, provides the board with the Child Abuse and Neglect memo, and so I'd like to share with you a few of those highlights. So our overarching purpose of this policy, JHC, is to ensure our student safety. I think we would all agree on that, but also to ensure that there's a public understanding and a confidence about how we go about this work with regards to receiving and reporting child abuse and neglect. And I think the third purpose is to articulate the Board of Education's expectations for communicating this work to our communities as well as to our employees, so that we are all on the same page and we are trained appropriately in order to know how to respond. This past year, and again, there's a lot of information in this memo, so I will not read it through word for word, if you're okay with that. However, I will highlight some of the pieces that we have. This past year, 2018-19, we continued to be vigilant with our work, both internally and externally. Internally through improving our training for all of our 26,000 plus employees, improving on our infrastructure as well as on our processes, and then externally with our strong collaborative efforts with our multidisciplinary team, our work with Child Protective Services, with Special Victims Investigative Division, with our State's Attorney's Office, as well as with our stakeholders within the community. We developed this past year a continuous improvement stakeholder group that consists of MCCPTA members as well as different members from those external groups. So we meet on a regular basis and do that work. Also this past July, updates to the regulation for this policy, Regulation JHCRA, were adopted by the superintendent. They included references to the recent revisions to the law that establish criminal penalties for knowingly failing to report child abuse and neglect. And they also reflected ESSA, the 2015 Every Student Succeeds Act, prohibiting the assistance of an employee, contractor, or volunteer in obtaining employment if the individual has information or reason to believe that that person was engaged in sexual misconduct involved in a minor or a student. Some of the work that we updated to that regulation. So moving on to how we've implemented this policy this past year. Our staff training, we improved our district mandatory compliance training to be more inclusive. We've provided extensive input from our partners with this work. We've added a new module on safety in a digital age within our training. We've always had, we've had for this past several years, guidelines and best practices for this work, but we've included it in a mandatory training now for all of our employees. We've improved training for all of our administrators and our child abuse and neglect and Title IX liaisons that are at every school. And just 2 weeks ago, we've went live with an online reporting process so that once we call Child Protective Services, the reporter can submit the paper trail online, and it's received in all 4 of those offices that need to have it, our external groups, instantly. So that's been really, we've had 65 of those reports that have really sped up our reporting process and our communication with our partners in that work. With regards to screening and our new and existing MCPS employees, on page 3 there, beginning in 2013, we required CPS background checks for our new employees. We, as a district, committed to this not only for our new employees, but for every single one of our employees. And we started rolling out in all of our schools, elementary, middle, and high school, doing this CPS check for all of our MCPS staff. This fall, now that we've completed the school-based work, this fall we're moving into the central office, starting with Department of Transportation. Criminal background checks for all new employees. 2018, this past year, we've implemented our screening to align with the new RAPBAC program, if you are unfamiliar with that, the Federal Records of Arrest and Prosecution. So this notification of any criminal history from the FBI We have that information. Previously, it was just through Maryland, and now it's obviously federal through the FBI. And then just to mention that our expectations in our training of self-reporting have been beneficial for our work with this screening process. We continue to check our teacher credentials against the NASTEC, which is the National Association for State Directors of Teacher Education. And effective just this July 1st, House Bill 486 went into effect, and our process for any applicant that's applying to one of our schools in Montgomery County expects them to provide all of their former and previous employers. And so our Human Resources Department is able to dig deeper into that information to make sure that there aren't any concerns at all or any allegations in the past with this person with regards to child sexual misconduct or child abuse in the past. Training and screening for our volunteers and contractors obviously continues this past year with our visitor management system. We provided all new technology to all of our schools, as well as training for all of our staff to make sure that they understand how this works. It does provide information of sex offenders registry, both through the state of Maryland as well as nationally. Our volunteer CAN training that continues for all of our volunteers and contractors. We've had more than to date since 2016 when we rolled out that current module. More than 90,000 volunteers have completed that child abuse and neglect training. We require criminal background checks for any of our extended and overnight trips. And we've worked this year to align our guidelines with our athletics and our arts department. We remain diligent with our contractors who access our school buildings and our facilities. And they must take verification to security in order to gain a contractor badge with MCPS that they've completed the training as well. Moving on to our student learning continuum that we've been implementing in our schools. This fall we will, just as we have last year, provide age-appropriate personal body safety lessons for all of our students, pre-K to 12. And as a result of, I believe, this meeting last year with the policy committee, we are collecting anonymous student feedback from those lessons and sharing that with our team, with our counselors, and with student services. And Dr. Cruz makes sure that our lessons are where we want them and that we're providing input from our students. This year, you're aware we've launched Be Well 365 to address and encourage the physical, social, and psychological well-being of our students. And again, this past June, we adopted Policy COA, which is Student Well-Being and School Safety. And then moving on to our collaboration, as I mentioned earlier, with our county partners and as well the Maryland State Department of Education, we continue to refine this MDT, multidisciplinary team process. March 4th, as a collaborative effort, we presented to the Montgomery County Council's Education Committee. They had asked for updates and they had asked for where we were with this information and this work. And we received great feedback from the County Council in that process. Working with the state, our employee engagement, labor relations staff and office has been working with MSDE on our work group for disqualification criteria for substitute teachers. We're making sure that our database, our clearinghouse for when we are hiring substitute teachers is in connection with when and where they may have subbed unsuccessfully in other districts. So we have that information, which is critical. Also in the memo, starting at page 6 through 10, are a number of our suspected cases that we've reported. We provide information in this memo for you on each of those cases. We also give you some big picture numbers. We've provided all of the letters in that memo for you to be able to access if you need to be reminded of the situation. We do have an uptick in our overall child abuse and neglect reports from the 17-18 school year to this year, about 100 additional reports. But we have seen a decrease, as reported in the Bethesda beat this past couple of days. We saw in the news a decrease in those reports that involved our staff. I mean, we know one is one too many, but we do feel that this work is becoming increasingly a part of our awareness and part of our sensitivity and any and all things that we do involving kids, and we do feel that it's paying off. Moving forward to this school year, FY20, we have a few additional considerations that we are moving forward on, as mentioned there. As you all are aware, we have ICB, the Inter-County Connection Board, who uses our buildings on a daily basis, almost every one of our schools. Making sure that their practices are aligned with our practices and our expectations is a next step and very important work for us. We are redesigning that volunteer child abuse and neglect module. The stakeholder group that I work with is going to be an influential partner with that, so that we are actually right now looking at the current volunteer module and then looking at the new staff employee module and seeing where we need to upgrade some research and we need to upgrade some language. Monitoring, enhancing this new online child abuse neglect reporting process that I mentioned, making sure that we're doing quality checks with the 4 offices that are receiving these, and then checking in just specifically on those reports to make sure that we're receiving what we're receiving and everything is in sync. And continuing to improve on the process for implementing House Bill 486. Like I said, our Human Resources Department has done a great job of being agile in this new expectation. But it's also something that we want to be able to support from many different offices and many different angles. It's incredibly important that we're doing this, to dig deeper, to make sure that we're hiring who we want to hire for our children and for our students. But we want to make sure we're fully supporting that work with human resources, as well as with the Wrap Back program that I mentioned and the substitute teacher warehouse for the disqualifications. And so those are some of the things we're moving forward with this school year. And I don't feel at this time that we are asking for revisions or changes currently to the policy, but continue to be, again, as vigilant as possible with what we do have in the policy and within the regulation, and implementing it with the finest fidelity.
I want to thank you for that report, and all of us have been through the training, and it is rigorous, and we really appreciate all the work that you've done, because I know things have been added since last year. And last night, Ms. O'Neill and I and 2 other persons from the board, Ms. Evans and Ms. Wolf, we were at the municipal, all the people who come from the municipalities have an organization. So one of their questions was about the child abuse and neglect. And you've covered all of those really important points. We really appreciate it, because I think they're really concerned. Penalties for not reporting, I don't think people really understand that you have to report this. But it was mentioned that if you see something, say something. And maybe that's one of the reasons we have more reports, but they may not be actuating these things. You just have reports because people are being much more careful about what they're seeing and what they're doing, and making sure that all our staff and volunteers and the folks that work with kids, even not just at overnight kind of things, but who work with the kids even during the day or in the evening, have the background check. And I think that's really important. And the updating of the fingerprinting, I think is really interesting, because people have been fingerprinted before, but they're going to be updated now. So, and the cooperation with the other agencies on criminal background checks is really important, I think. And we thank Human Resources also for looking at the teachers that come to us, because often we do get people that they may not be doing criminal things, but they may not be appropriate for us.
Children.
And so now we can get some more information about that. And being able to do CPS right away, they were talking about, Mr. Chevanini and his staff came to talk about how they're updating and fixing our technology. So that's another piece of it, I'm sure. But really, thank you. And we'll leave it at that.
You're welcome.
Well, Thank you. We have to take every step possible to protect our children, and unfortunately, many pedophiles gravitate to places where children are. I mean, at parks, through churches, through camps, and God forbid our schools. And I think that we are taking appropriate actions. But when there are high-profile ones, Mr. Sivan, can you just explain, we don't keep people who are arrested or convicted on payroll indefinitely. How does the process work? I think, the public, would like to know what happens.
So I'll note that our colleague, Associate Superintendent Sherwin Collette, is in the audience, so he can chime in if I don't put all the points in the process. But we spelled out, and part of the work that the board did a number of years ago was to be very clear on what happens when we have a report. And so we're sequencing first that we're working very closely with our county partner agencies, Child Protective Services, Child Welfare, also known as State's Attorney's Office, and the police, particularly the Special Victims Investigations Unit, to coordinate our work with them. Because one of the main issues that was emphasized, and I actually remember Dr. Daka stressing this as we were reviewing the policy before the full board, is that we don't want to do anything to, in any way, impede their investigation. Because what needs to happen first and foremost is that they need to be able to move and work. That said, we also don't want anybody who is under investigation to be still exposed to students. So that's very careful and close work that Mr. Collette and Mr. Edmondson, and I see Dr. Labat, are involved with extensively behind the scenes to coordinate that work, to make sure that when Child Protective Services or the police take an investigation and are working it through, that somebody is on administrative leave and restricted from working with children. Then we also spelled out, because we wanted to also be able to communicate to our communities as much as we could, again, not making sure that we don't in any way impede an investigation. So the policy and then our MOU with our county partner agencies spells out that we're going to communicate about an arrest, and we're going to communicate broadly about an arrest. Interestingly, I should note that we did also look and see if there were any other school districts that had made the commitment that we did to post their community notification letters, or even, as the board has directed us, an annual policy on their website for all to see. And we've taken those suggestions and incorporated them. So you'll see part of this links to those notification letters that anybody in the community can see. And then so if somebody is arrested, and regardless, really, we've also committed, the board has committed, and then we back this up in regulation, that we're going to do our own independent investigation, even if CPS rules the case out, even if the police don't investigate, because the case may not meet the high standard of criminal prosecution, but it still may be misconduct under our policies and regulations, and we're going to take vigorous action there. All that is to say that we're working closely with our county partner agencies to support their work and not to interfere with it, to collaborate fully, and then to follow up with, as swift as possible, administrative action on our part to move forward, so that, and you'll see in some of the write-ups in here how the updates on individuals arrested and their ultimate employment status with us. The folks who are arrested and convicted are not still on the payroll of MCPS.
So the action base on the internal follow-up, it talks about removal from employment, and I guess it lists 19 employees, 1 volunteer. So safe to say that those 19 off the payroll. I mean, for the most part, I'm just asking in this report.
So just working from memory here. So fundamentally, when as Mr. Sivan was explaining, for this employees listed here, there aren't any of them that I'm aware of that remain on our payroll, which is the question you're asking. Fundamentally, what we have to ensure, though, is that we afford the proper due process steps, and some of that work involves initially, while charges may have been brought, ensuring that that staff member is separated and is on administrative leave. That may begin, not always, but sometimes may begin with a paid status that we then work quickly to convert to unpaid, and then also working at the same time around separation, termination, depending on the charges and the sort of due process steps. And we do that in partnership too with union and association partners, right? So so under the law, there's a presumption of innocence. Clearly, depending on an offense for which someone is arrested, and they may be arrested for crimes outside of Montgomery County Public Schools, we then work through to ensure that we are taking the necessary steps, and also looking at the terms of release. So someone who may be incarcerated, clearly is unavailable to work, maybe they're released. However, the conditions of their release are that they're not to be around students. We wouldn't want them to necessarily be around students, so we take those steps to one, change their pay status, and then also proceed with termination at the appropriate steps.
Okay, thank you. I didn't mean to put you all on the spot, but I just think it's a question that frequently is out there in the community. And the only other question, and you guys may not be the appropriate one, but I saw that Arlington County has just implemented a new visitor management system. And they said that the principal, when someone comes up and is identified as on the sex offender registry, that it's the principal's responsibility to take the action. I just wonder if maybe it requires a follow-up, but.
I think we need to look into that. I'm not aware of what that system is, but I can certainly come back with that.
Okay, I just wondered, when people swipe their driver's license and it comes up, that they're, what are the follow-ups?
So the administration would call Student Welfare and Compliance, and we would work with the Office of Employee Engagement, Labor Relations, to find out exactly what the circumstance might be, but they're not permitted into the building if it comes up.
I just think that it would be, it triggered in my mind, what happens at the school when that happens, and I think it would be useful for the board to sort of receive a follow-up and see,
And we can certainly identify and communicate in a follow-up practices that are in place, but quickly, if a visitor comes in and their ID is swiped and it comes back that they are a registered sex offender, they would not be allowed to proceed past the office point of the building. It's technology, and sometimes the technology may give a false positive because someone has the same name, and the quick swipe will come back and say the person who's standing there is a registered sex offender, or has some other type of litigation that would prevent them from being in the building. And so they may stand there long enough arguing their point that staff may get another follow-up report that negates the first report, which would then also cause them to reach out either to our office or to the Office of General Counsel, maybe even to Student Welfare and Compliance, just to confirm that. There are also some instances because of that false read where multiple names come back. And again, schools have become very adept at looking at that information and erring on the side of caution and making the phone call rather than allowing someone to go in where there might be a question. But there are several opportunities there where staff have been responding to those types of situations.
Any other comments? Well, I have one about grooming. That wasn't clear to me until we started doing the training, and we have had cases where teachers have been terminated, but it took us a long time to get to that because people didn't know they needed to report some things that were happening that seem minor, but really are not. And the thing about I'm going to speak about teachers who groom, they get the community to love them. They do special things for the kids, and then it just develops from there. And so it's really good to have that information in the training so that all of our staff can be aware of that.
And we revised and updated those definitions too, based on the research, the most recent research that we have.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just want to point out that when the board adopted the policy, revised policy, we called for this yearly update and reporting as part of our monitoring. It was adopted as part of the policy. And I think it's very important, and I think it speaks to the transparency that we have put forward, and not every district is doing that.
Okay, if there's nothing else, Mr. Tinbite? No. Then thank you very much for the report. This will, of course, be passed to the board. And if there are any other comments, questions, then can I have a motion for adjournment?
Move adjournment.
Then we are adjourned.